Once upon a time, in a gleaming city where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and wealth flowed like rivers of gold, there lived a man named Femi. He was not merely rich, he was a titan of industry, a billionaire whose name commanded respect in every boardroom and whose signature could change the fortunes of thousands. His empire spanned real estate, technology, and manufacturing. When Femi walked into a room, silence followed, then applause. He wore suits tailored in Milan, drove cars assembled by hand in Germany, and lived in a penthouse that overlooked the entire city like a king surveying his kingdom. But Femi had not always been born to such splendor. He had clawed his way up from modest beginnings, and perhaps that memory, though distant and fading, kept a small ember of humanity burning in his chest. His business partner, Ibuka, often told him he was too soft, too sentimental for a man of his stature. Ibuka was sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, a man who saw the world in profit margins and loss columns, who believed that kindness was a luxury only fools could afford. "You give too much to charity," Ibuka would say over whiskey in Femi's mahogany-paneled office. "These people, they'll bleed you dry if you let them." Femi would smile and wave him off. "There's enough to go around, my friend. What's a few million when you have billions?" His sister Ayo, younger by 3 years, and the only family he had left after their parents passed, saw a different side of him. She lived a simpler life, teaching at a local school, and often worried that the weight of wealth was changing her brother in ways he couldn't see. But she also knew his heart, remembered the boy who had shared his last piece of bread with a stray dog, who had worked 3 jobs to put her through university. One scorching afternoon, Femi's driver took a different route through the old part of the city to avoid traffic. The limousine glided through narrow streets where the paint peeled from buildings and children played in dust rather than parks. Femi gazed out the tinted window, half bored, half curious, when he saw her. She sat beneath a dying acacia tree, her clothes little more than rags stitched together with desperation. Her feet were bare and cracked, her hair matted with dust and neglect. Before her lay a dented tin cup with 3 coins inside, the sum total of the day's mercy from passers-by. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, but hardship had aged her face. Her eyes, though her eyes still held a flicker of something unbroken. "Stop the car," Femi said suddenly. The driver hesitated. "Sir?" "Stop the car." The limousine pulled to the side of the road, and Femi stepped out into the heat. The smell of poverty hit him immediately: sweat, garbage, despair. He walked toward the woman, and she looked up at him with those eyes, wide with surprise and perhaps fear. Men in $1,000 shoes did not approach beggars unless they meant to move them along. "What's your name?" Femi asked, his voice gentler than he had used in months. The woman stared at him for a long moment before answering. "Ola," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Ola," Femi repeated. "Have you eaten today?" She shook her head, a small, defeated gesture. Femi turned to his driver. "There's a restaurant 2 blocks back. Go and bring food, enough for a feast. Rice, chicken, vegetables, fruit, everything." The driver blinked. "Sir, we have a meeting in—" "The meeting can wait. Go. Now." 20 minutes later, Femi sat on the dusty ground beside Ola, heedless of his pristine suit, as she ate. He had never seen anyone eat with such gratitude, such careful savoring of every bite, as though each grain of rice were a precious gem. He watched her in silence, and something shifted in his chest. A memory, perhaps, of hunger he had once known, or simply the recognition of shared humanity across a great divide. When she finished, Ola looked at him with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for me?" Femi stood and brushed off his suit. He pulled out his wallet and handed her a stack of bills, more money than she had seen in her entire life. "Because everyone deserves kindness," he said simply. "Use this well. May it change your life." Then he returned to his limousine and drove away, back to his world of glass and steel, of conference calls and quarterly reports. He did not look back, did not see Ola clutching the money to her chest as though it were salvation itself. He did not see her whisper a prayer to the universe, a vow that she would never forget this moment, never forget the man who had seen her when she was invisible. It was a small act, a moment's impulse on a hot afternoon. Femi forgot about it within a week. The universe did not. 3 years passed like chapters in a book, each one turning faster than the last. Femi's empire continued to grow, or so it seemed, but empires, like men, can rot from the inside while maintaining a golden exterior. It began with whispers, rumors of bad investments, of a deal in Southeast Asia that had gone sour. Femi dismissed them. He had weathered storms before, but Ebuka seemed nervous during their meetings, his eyes shifting, his laughter too loud and too frequent. "Everything's fine," Ebuka assured him. "Just market fluctuations. We'll ride it out." Io noticed the change in her brother during their monthly dinners. He seemed distracted, his smiles forced. "Is something wrong?" she asked one evening over plates of jollof rice at her modest apartment. "Just business complications," Femi said, waving his hand dismissively. "Nothing I can't handle." But he was wrong. The collapse came swiftly, brutally, like a building demolished by expertly placed explosives. One morning, Femi arrived at his office to find government officials waiting, their faces grave, their briefcases full of warrants and accusations. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. The words hit him like physical blows. "There must be a mistake," Femi stammered, his famous composure crumbling. "I've done nothing illegal. Ebuka handles the financial—" The name died on his lips as realization dawned. Ebuka, his business partner, his friend of 15 years. The investigation revealed the truth in devastating detail. Ebuka had been siphoning money for years, cooking the books, creating shell companies, and attributing illegal transactions to Femi's signature. Forged with masterful precision. By the time the authorities finished their audit, Femi's fortune had evaporated like morning mist. The billions were gone, stolen or seized. His accounts were frozen. His properties were confiscated. The business partner he had trusted had vanished, fled to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving Femi to face the consequences alone. The media had a field day. Headlines screamed his fall from grace. Former friends stopped returning his calls. Business associates who had once fawned over him now crossed the street to avoid him. The penthouse was seized, the cars were auctioned, the fine suits were sold to pay lawyers who ultimately could do nothing to save him. Within 6 months, Femi, who had once commanded billions, found himself living in a cramped one-room apartment in the same old neighborhood where he had once stopped to feed a beggar. The irony was not lost on him. Ayo was the only one who stood by him. She brought him food, sat with him in silence when words were too heavy to bear, held him when he wept with rage and shame and disbelief. "How did this happen?" he asked her one night, his voice broken. "I built everything from nothing. I worked every day for 20 years, and one man destroyed it all." "You trusted the wrong person," Ayo said softly. "But you're not destroyed, Femi. You're still here. You're still alive." "For what?" he said bitterly. "To live in poverty? To be pitied? To be remembered as a criminal?" He took to walking the streets at night, unable to sleep, haunted by the ghost of his former self. The city that had once been his kingdom now felt like a prison. He saw his own reflection in shop windows, gaunt, unshaven, wearing second-hand clothes, and barely recognized himself. One evening, desperate for money to pay rent, Femi stood on a street corner with a cardboard sign. The words were simple: "Fallen on hard times. Anything helps." The humiliation was crushing. People walked past without seeing him, just as he had once walked past thousands of struggling souls without a second thought. A few tossed coins at his feet without even looking at his face. He was invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. As the sun set and the street lamps flickered to life, Femi gathered his handful of coins and trudged back to his apartment. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step a reminder of how far he had fallen. In his tiny room, he collapsed onto the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was all life had left for him. He thought of ending it all. The thought came quietly, seductively, promising relief from the endless shame. But then he thought of Io, of the disappointment in her eyes, and he pushed the darkness away for another night. The next morning, Femi woke to pounding on his door. He opened it to find his landlord, a rotund man with a perpetual scowl. Rent's due, the landlord grunted. You're 3 days late. I'll have it tomorrow, Femi said, though he had no idea how. You said that last month. Tomorrow, or you're out. The door slammed and Femi sank to the floor. He had hit bottom. There was nowhere left to fall. Or so he thought. The black Mercedes pulled up silently in front of Femi's dilapidated apartment building on a Wednesday morning. The neighbors, accustomed to broken cars and motorcycles, stopped to stare. The vehicle was pristine, expensive, utterly out of place in this neighborhood of poverty and neglect. Femi was returning from another fruitless day of job hunting, his 9th rejection in 2 weeks, when he saw the car. A driver in a crisp uniform stepped out and opened the rear door. A woman emerged and Femi's breath caught in his throat. She was dressed in an elegant navy business suit that probably cost more than 6 months of his former rent. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup subtle but flawless. Diamond earrings caught the afternoon light. She wore success like a second skin, comfortable and natural. She moved with the confidence of someone who had conquered the world and made it kneel. But it was her eyes that stopped Femi cold. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. Ola? The name escaped his lips as a whisper, a question, a prayer. She smiled. And in that smile he saw the ghost of the broken girl he had fed under an acacia tree 5 years ago. But this was no ghost. This was a woman transformed, reborn, powerful beyond measure. Hello, Femi, she said, her voice smooth and cultured, nothing like the hoarse whisper he remembered. It's been a long time. Femi couldn't speak. His mind struggled to reconcile the beggar with the billionaire standing before him. She walked toward him, her heels clicking on the broken pavement, and he noticed people gathering, watching, whispering. I heard about your troubles, Ola said, stopping a few feet away. The news reached me even in London, where I've been living. I'm sorry for what happened to you. How? Femi finally managed. How is this possible? Ola glanced at the gathering crowd, then back at Femi. Perhaps we could talk somewhere more private, unless you'd prefer to have this conversation in the street. Shame burned through him. His apartment was a hovel, barely fit for rats, but pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. I live upstairs, he said quietly. It's not much. I don't need much, Ola replied, just your time. They climbed the stairs in silence, Femi acutely aware of the peeling paint, the smell of mold, the sounds of arguing families behind thin walls. He unlocked his door and gestured her inside, mortified by the single room that served as bedroom, kitchen, and living space all at once. Ola entered without hesitation, without judgment. She looked around once, then turned to face him. Do you remember the day we met? She asked. Yes, Femi said. I've thought about it sometimes. Wondered what happened to you. You gave me food that day, Ola said, her voice soft with memory. You gave me money, but more than that, you gave me something I had lost. Hope. You saw me when I was invisible. You treated me like a human being when the world had decided I was trash. Femi shook his head. It was nothing, just a meal. To you, perhaps. To me, it was everything. Ola walked to the small window that overlooked the street. After you left that day, I stared at the money in my hands for an hour. It was more than I had ever possessed. I could have spent it on food for a month, maybe 2. But I remembered your words. Use this well. May it change your life. She turned to face him, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. So I took a risk. I used that money to buy fabric, beautiful fabric from a merchant who was about to throw it away because of small defects. I taught myself to sew, working through the night, making clothes. I sold them on the street, reinvested every penny. Within a year, I had a small stall. Within 2, a shop. Femi listened, transfixed. That's when I met Adebayo, Ola continued. He was a businessman who saw potential in my designs. He became my mentor, my guide. He taught me about business, about scaling, about thinking bigger than survival. He connected me with investors, with opportunities. My one shop became 5, then 10, then a factory. My local designs caught the attention of international buyers. She paused, a smile playing at her lips. 5 years after you fed me under that tree, I own the largest fashion empire in West Africa. My clothes are worn by celebrities in Paris, New York, Tokyo. I employ over 5,000 people. I'm worth $3 billion, Femi. 3 billion. And it all started with your kindness. The silence that followed was deafening. Femi felt dizzy, overwhelmed. The universe had flipped itself inside out. The beggar was a billionaire. The billionaire was a beggar. "Why are you here?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. Ola stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "Because I never forgot. Because 5 years ago, when you had everything, you didn't have to stop for me. You didn't have to see me, but you did. And now that you've lost everything, I want you to know something." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, pressing it into his trembling hand. "You're not forgotten," she said. "You're not invisible. I see you, Femi, just as you once saw me." The business card sat on Femi's makeshift table for 3 days. He stared at it for hours, turned it over in his hands, memorized every letter of Ola's name embossed in gold. Ola Adeyemi, CEO, Adeyemi Fashion Empire. A phone number, an email, an address in the most expensive district of the city. Pride warred with desperation in Femi's chest. To call her would be to accept charity, to admit defeat, to acknowledge that he needed saving. But wasn't that the truth? Hadn't he already been saved once by Ayo's unwavering support, by the kindness of a landlord who gave him one more week, by the soup kitchen that fed him when his pockets were empty? On the fourth day, Ayo visited and found him staring at the card. "Who is she?" his sister asked, picking it up. Femi told her the story, all of it. The girl under the tree, the meal, the money, the impossible transformation. Ayo listened in silence, then set the card down carefully. "And you haven't called her because," she prompted. "Because I don't know what she wants," Femi said, frustration leaking into his voice. "Why would she track me down? What does she expect from me?" "Maybe she expects nothing," Ayo said quietly. "Maybe she's just returning a kindness." "No one becomes a billionaire by being sentimental," Femi said bitterly. "She wants something. They always want something." Ayo studied her brother with sad eyes. "When did you become so cynical? When did you start believing that kindness must have ulterior motives?" Her words stung because they were true. Ebuka's betrayal had poisoned something in Femi, turned him suspicious and hard. He had forgotten that his own act of kindness 5 years ago had expected nothing in return. That evening, Femi called the number. Ola answered on the second ring. "I was wondering if you'd call," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I need to know why you're here," Femi said bluntly. "What do you want from me?" There was a pause, then, "Have dinner with me tomorrow night. Let me tell you about my journey. Let me show you what your kindness created. Then you can decide if I want anything from you." The restaurant where they met the next evening was one Femi had once dined at regularly, back when he could afford $100 steaks without glancing at the bill. Now the maitre d' didn't recognize him, looked at his worn clothes with barely concealed disdain until Ola arrived and the man's demeanor shifted instantly to obsequious attention. They sat by the window overlooking the city lights, and Ola ordered wine that cost more than Femi's monthly rent. She saw his discomfort and smiled. "I know what you're thinking," she said, "that this is too much, that I'm showing off. But Femi, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this to humiliate you. I'm doing this to show you that transformation is possible, that rock bottom is not the end." Over dinner she told him everything, how Adebayo had found her selling clothes on the street corner and been impressed by her designs, how he had taken a chance on her, invested in her first real shop, taught her everything he knew about business. "Adebayo came from nothing too," Ola explained. "He built a logistics company from a single truck. He understood hunger, real hunger, and he saw it in me. But he also saw hunger of a different kind, the hunger to be more, to create, to matter." She described the long nights of learning, studying business books by candlelight, teaching herself English and French and Mandarin to speak with international clients. She talked about the failures, 3 product lines that flopped, a factory fire that nearly bankrupted her, competitors who tried to destroy her. "But I never forgot where I came from," Ola said, her eyes intense. "Every time I wanted to quit, Every time it seemed impossible, I remembered that day under the tree. I remembered that someone believed I deserved kindness, that someone saw worth in me when I had nothing. That kept me going. Femi listened, humbled and awed. He had forgotten his own act of kindness, dismissed it as trivial. But to Ola, it had been the seed from which everything grew. "Now I want to ask you something," Ola said, setting down her wine glass. "What do you want, Femi? If you could have anything, what would it be?" "My life back," he said immediately, then stopped. "No, that's not true. I don't want that life back. I want to matter again. I want to build something real. I want to know that my existence makes a difference." Ola nodded slowly. "Then I have a proposition for you." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were documents, business plans, financial projections. "I'm expanding my empire into sustainable manufacturing," Ola explained, "creating jobs, reducing environmental impact, building communities. I need someone to run the operation, someone who understands business at the highest level, but has also learned humility, someone who knows what it's like to have everything and to have nothing." Femi stared at the papers, his heart pounding. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a partnership," Ola corrected. 20% equity, full operational control, a chance to build something that matters, that helps people, that creates lasting change. "Why?" Femi whispered. "After everything that happened to me, after I failed so spectacularly, why would you trust me?" Ola reached across the table and took his hand. "Because 5 years ago you trusted me. A beggar with nothing, no credentials, no promises. You gave without expecting anything in return. Now I'm returning that trust. Not as charity, Femi. As an investment in someone I believe in." Tears fell from Femi's eyes, the first he had allowed himself to cry in front of anyone except Io. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion he couldn't name. "I don't know what to say," he managed. "Say yes," Ola replied simply. "Say you'll take this chance. Say you'll help me build something beautiful." Femi looked at the woman across from him, this miracle of transformation, this living proof that kindness echoes across time and returns in unexpected ways. He thought of the girl under the tree, the broken beggar he had fed on a whim. He thought of the man he had been, the man he had become, the man he might yet be. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I'll do it." Ola smiled, radiant and triumphant. "Then let's change the world together." 2 years later, Femi stood in the conference room of Adeyemi Femi Sustainable Industries, looking out at the factory complex that sprawled below. 3 buildings, 500 employees, products sold in 12 countries. It was smaller than his old empire, but infinitely more meaningful. The business had thrived under their partnership. Ola's vision and capital, combined with Femi's operational expertise and hard-won wisdom, created something neither could have built alone. They manufactured eco-friendly textiles, created jobs for people from the poorest neighborhoods, and reinvested profits into education and community development. Femi had learned to live differently. He had a comfortable apartment now, not a penthouse, but a real home. He drove a modest car. He wore nice suits, but not the obscenely expensive ones he had once favored. He had enough, and he had discovered that enough was actually quite a lot. More importantly, he had purpose. Every person they hired, every community they supported, every sustainable practice they pioneered, it all mattered. He went to bed tired but satisfied, woke up with energy and direction. The bitter cynicism that had poisoned him after Ibuka's betrayal had slowly dissolved, replaced by cautious optimism and genuine gratitude. Ao had been right all along. Kindness didn't require ulterior motives. Sometimes it was just kindness, echoing forward through time, creating ripples that became waves. The door opened behind him, and Ola entered with Adebayo. The older man had become Femi's mentor too, teaching him not just about business, but about resilience, about building wealth with purpose, about leading with integrity. The board meeting went well, Ola announced, smiling. They approved the new factory in Abuja. 200 more jobs. Femi grinned. "That's fantastic." "There's something else," Adebayo said, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "We've been approached by the government." They want to make our sustainability model the template for national manufacturing standards. Femi felt his chest swell with pride, not the old pride of ego and status, but something deeper. The pride of knowing their work would ripple outward, affecting thousands, maybe millions of lives. That evening, Femi invited Ayo to dinner at the same restaurant where Ola had made her proposition 2 years earlier. His sister arrived wearing a new dress, a gift from Ola's fashion line, and they sat by the same window, looking out at the same city lights. "You've changed," Ayo observed, studying her brother. "You smile more, you sleep better, you're lighter." "I am," Femi agreed. "I lost everything and found something better." "Which is?" "Perspective," Femi said. "When I was on top, I thought my wealth defined me. When I lost it, I thought I was nothing. But I was wrong both times. We're not what we own. We're what we give. We're the ripples we create." Ayo raised her glass. "To ripples, then." They clinked glasses, and Femi thought about the strange journey that had brought him here, from billionaire to beggar to partner, from arrogance to humility to wisdom, from giving without thinking to receiving without expecting to giving again with intention. The next week, Femi did something he had been planning for months. He returned to the old neighborhood, to the street where he had first met Ola. The acacia tree was still there, though more withered than before. He sat beneath it and waited. They came slowly at first, the invisible people, the forgotten ones. A homeless man. A woman with 3 children and desperate eyes. A teenage boy with an infected wound on his leg. Femi had brought food, medicine, warm clothes. He distributed them personally, looking each person in the eyes, asking their names, hearing their stories. Word spread quickly in the community. Over the following weeks, Femi returned every Saturday. He brought not just charity, but opportunity. Job applications for their company, information about training programs, connections to resources. Some people took the help and vanished, unable or unwilling to change. Others grabbed hold and pulled themselves up, step by painful step. One Saturday, a young woman approached him. She was thin, dirty, carrying a baby wrapped in cloth that had seen better years. She looked at Femi with eyes that held no hope, only desperate resignation. "Please," she whispered, "my baby is hungry." Femi looked at her, and in her face he saw Ola as she had been. He saw himself as he had been, lost, broken, needing rescue. He saw all the invisible people he had walked past in his former life, unseeing and uncaring. He took her hand. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amaka," she replied, confused by the question. "Amaka," Femi repeated. "Have you and your baby eaten today?" She shook her head. Femi smiled. "Then let me feed you, let me help you. And then, if you're willing, let me tell you about a woman named Ola, who was once exactly where you are now. Let me tell you how one act of kindness changed everything." As the sun set over the city, Femi sat under the acacia tree with Amaka and her baby, sharing food and stories and hope. He didn't know if this woman would become the next Ola, if this kindness would echo across years and return transformed. It didn't matter. He had learned the secret that Ola had known all along. Kindness is not an investment with expected returns. It's not a transaction or a strategy. It's simply a choice to see people, to acknowledge their humanity, to offer help when you can. Sometimes kindness returns amplified, sometimes it disappears into the void. But it always matters to the person receiving it in that moment. And that, Femi had finally learned, was enough. Years later, when journalists asked Ola about her incredible success story, she always mentioned Femi, both the billionaire who had helped her and the partner who had helped build her empire. And when they asked Femi about his fall and rise, his loss and redemption, he always smiled and said the same thing. "I learned that we're all one bad day away from needing help and one good day away from offering it. The question isn't whether we'll find ourselves giving or receiving kindness. The question is whether we'll be wise enough to do both with grace." The circle was complete. The beggar had become the billionaire. The billionaire had become the beggar. And together they had become something better than either, builders of a world where kindness echoes forward, where every small act of humanity plants seeds that might someday grow into forests. Once upon a time, In a gleaming city where fortunes rose and fell like tides, there lived two people who learned that the greatest wealth is not what we possess, but what we give away. And they lived, not happily ever after, but meaningfully ever after, which is far more important.